2019 being all about streaming moving into the next level thanks to Stadia and xCloud, you could easily forget that this has been around for almost 10 years already, with its first presence almost twice that time. OnLive were the pioneers, and like Gaikai, became part of Sony Studios many years back. With the likes of Shadow, Nvidia and even EA all getting in on the act, the stage is set for history repeating itself when computers and consoles first started out. We were spoilt for choice back then, but this is for another day. Today's video is all about the #1 game on demand service in the world that has been around for 5 years and is giving us the future now. Game streaming really boils down to two main options: video or image based feeds or instruction feeds, but both are bound by a similar issue: latency. Now, latency is time it takes to get from A to B, commonly referred to as time of flight. Now, in networks, this is measured often using a ping command, traceroute being more in depth than that, offering the hops and the route it takes. And yes, a ping is just like a radar or sonar. Just like a dolphin can bounce a sound wave out and then calculate the distance to an object based on how long it takes to return, on a network, your round trip is confirmed via a ping like this, and the time it takes you in milliseconds is your ping or latency rate. Thus, like frame times, lower is better, and it means that your requests and the messages back have a shorter journey time. Your bandwidth will not reduce your latency, only the amount of data you can send and receive at once. It may help hide latency, which is what many developers do inside the machines of PCs and consoles. Again, for another video. These are called packets, and they vary in size, content and even order, which is what the TCP protocol introduced. This stands for Transmission Control Protocol and Internet Protocol. Now, without this, you would not be watching this video, or indeed viewing, reading or even communicating on the internet. In short, this handles the structured transmission of data back and forth between client, you via your internet browser, or your gaming application to the host server, and in this case that would be YouTube or the chosen cloud-based server for your game. One of its main tasks is to ensure a full message is sent from source. No matter the order it goes out in, it always gets processed in order. This can slow the delivery time though. So many methods require speed over accuracy and use UDP or User Datagram Protocol, which drops most of the consistency and accuracy checks in favour of just sheer speed. VoIP, video or music streaming, and yes, cloud gaming all rely on this method, and is why you get skips, drops, severe distortion briefly at times, as data can be lost and either needs to be re-requested again or ignored and a failback is used. Now, the big difference in movie streaming and games is you can buffer up to a few seconds of data on the client, your TV. And then any drops, dips or errors that are hidden by this local pot being half full at all times never really gets seen by the viewer, as you only watch it, and to have a 5-10 second or more latency or lag is not important or indeed even noticed. You just have that buffering at the start and away you go. Games are not so simple. As we have direct control, then we need all the time to feel like it's interactive. If you buffer things, that's not what happens. The long story short means games have no buffer really, and they need to be hand to mouth for each button press and resulting on-screen action. With what you know now, you can see that two main blockers sit in the way of gorgeous 4K 120 FPS streaming: bandwidth and latency, the enemy of gaming nirvana. Now, PSNOW tries to solve this with a few basic principles to remove as much delay, latency really, as possible. Now, direct encoding is one way that they do this. By not rendering the remote server image to a screen via the HDMI protocols, likely saves around 10, maybe 16 milliseconds. Instead, the image is compressed directly by the codec into the video feed. This reduced image is transmitted back to your console or PC, and using your local hardware is decompressed via hardware acceleration onto the screen. By using direct compression, decompression in hardware like this saves a few vital milliseconds and can be given back to the player. In addition, better quality can be maintained via a lower bandwidth and image size, with the image being filtered and scaled locally once sent to improve final display at the fastest rate using direct hardware and software. In addition, because you're outputting your image directly to a image screen and then firing it straight off down the internet. It also means you can change anti-aliasing and all those elements and actually have them done at the other end on the player if it saves time to do that. So there's lots of options here, and in fact that little option there, I do suspect some of the anti-aliasing changes are being made by PSNOW here, because the majority of the test all comes out at 1280 by 720 as a base resolution. There are points where it can creep up towards a 900p level, and it's not identical to a 720p output, which you can see an example of here, re-rendering a native display back to 720p and comparing the two. You can see the image quality is ever so slightly better, the detail and frequency is ever so slightly better on the PSNOW feed than it is on the native 720 feed here, but the entire game is rendered at the native resolution as it would be on the PS4 at 1080p, then downscaled back to 720p, which is what I've emulated here. Now, some of this is always going to be worse on the feed no matter what, because the macro blocking, dark areas, all those obvious signs you get on internet feeds of video, you're going to get here, because effectively it's the same thing, just slightly better techniques. But overall, the image quality is somewhere between 720p and 900p on both the PC and the PS4. The PC can ever so slightly look better. Incredibly minor, you'd never notice it, but if you zoom in and look at some of the areas, it does have a ever so slightly higher frequency image than the PS4 version does. You'd never ever notice that unless you did this kind of zoomed in level, but it is there. If you want to look for it, there is a slight difference between the two. But if you can notice it in gameplay, then you've got better eyeballs than me and pretty much 99.9% of the population. Some of it comes across with the higher frequency details in the map, which you can see the little dots better, and also the edge is slightly more aliased on the PC, just like it is on the native PS4 version, with less AA and less smudging and smearing, which is the standard results you get from a strong TAA, which leads me to believe, like I've said earlier, that the AA is slightly different here in the rendered version on the game natively than it is on the one coming from the stream on PSNOW.
What are the satellites saying, Victor?
Right now, not a goddamn thing. I've lost the signal.
Hey, you know what never loses signal? Paper. All right, this route right here should take us straight to the volcano. Might get a little bumpy, though.
Let's get the show on the road.
Okay.
All right.
So, what are we looking for out here?
Well, the map shows all these structures around the volcano.
Okay, kid. Just don't drop us.
Just keep it slow, keep it in the center. Yeah, there's a lot of backseat driving going on. We're good. Everything's good.
Jesus Christ. Onward and upward. Onward and upward.
Slip and slide.
It's in pretty good shape for something several hundred years old.
Yeah. Definitely ruins from Avery's era.
So when it comes down to image quality compared to the native PS4 version, it's obviously much softer, it breaks up more, but in bright sunshine areas, bright areas like you see here in Uncharted 4, then on PC or PS4 on PSNOW, it works perfectly, and in fact, you could be convinced that this is just a 720p feed most of the time. There are some obvious artifacting, again in the darker areas. Some of the games I'll touch on in a moment, God of War and Doom suffer in certain areas due to the colour palette, the tones, and the artistic style of the game, but Uncharted is perfectly suited for this because many areas of the game are very bright, very detailed, and thus it hides that macro blocking and all the artifacts, which you can see examples of here very, very well. Again, it just looks like an incredibly TAA passed title rather than a very smudged and smeared title. So it would pass for most players if you haven't got a PS4 and you want to play Uncharted, God of War, or all the other exclusives on the PlayStation. Then this is the cheapest way to dive in, £8.99 or the 7-day free trial. And it really gives you a very close and almost identical looking version. If you played around with the sharpness on your TV, you may even get it to look even better. It certainly would convince most people. Not me, not the aficionados that watch this channel. If you're a hardcore gamer like myself and into the tech, it looks horrible, it looks smudged, you wouldn't put up with it. But this is not designed for me, it's not designed for the hardcore gamers, this is designed for the mainstream, far more lucrative mainstream. And it ticks that box very well indeed. But in terms of the underpinning technology, it's very impressive. When you think about the amount of distance it's travelling back and forth, it's a very impressive outcome. Other titles have very similar looking visual quality overall in the bright areas. God of War is another good example. Here though, comparing it to the PS4 Pro running at the 4K checkerboard solution, captured directly at 1080p rather than 4K, because that wouldn't be very fair, and then displayed on screen, you can see the difference in clarity instantly. Lots and lots of details lost on the skin of Kratos, the distance in the backgrounds, Atreus, all the details in the face, the minor and high frequency details, which I mention all the time, they're all pretty much smudged or lost completely on this feed. And again, if you are jumping side by side, this stands out instantly. Much of this is down to that 720 native feed, which really arguably isn't enough. 1080p is what you should be aiming for on this level. Bearing in mind this is a better quality feed than your average YouTube 1080p, but still 720 doesn't really cut it. Now, there are many areas they could touch on here, but I'm not going to go into my ideas and my plans and my thoughts about how that would work because it's not relevant for this video, but it is a good level of detail, quality and depth overall. If you're just interested in playing the game and getting on it cheap, then I would argue that a good portion of the gaming community would put up with this in terms of image quality on a 1080p screen. The bigger the screen, the higher the resolution. 4K, it's going to look worse, but I passed it to a few people looking at these tests, and some of them looked at it and went, yeah, it looks okay, didn't really think anything of it. This is a good point coming up now. Look at the macro blocking in this dark cave on the right hand side for PSNOW compared to the native PS4 Pro. Look at all those blocks, all that dark area, that contrast, these are the areas where the compression really starts to show up, and you'll see it again in a minute on Doom. It's very bad, and that is where its biggest weaknesses come from. It's not from the bright areas, that hides it very well. High contrast, that's where you see the difference. Lots and lots of colour banding, lots and lots of breakup, and again, these are all things they can work and improve on when they improve their codec process and how they stream the footage and the data back to the console. RGB feed, like I say, I'm not going to go into it here, but there is many options. This is the very first start of what's really starting to be delivered. Google will push it forward, Microsoft will push it forward, and then Sony will have to step up their game and improve it themselves. They're probably holding off some improvements they've already got in the pipeline, both for PS5 and just to see what Stadia and everyone else is going to deliver. So there's no point in showing your hand just yet. Hold it off until you go ready to everyone else to jump into the market. And again, this is why the price has dropped down to $8.99, which now makes it far more attractive. With some more side-by-sides, you can see the detail is lost, and the rendering is slightly different on the online version of Doom. The HUD never came up natively. I had to fiddle around with the settings, and also you can see the core A, it's missing on the native PS4 version, but it's present on the remote rendered one, which is an odd bug. But again, the macro blocking, look at the dark areas I've highlighted here on the left-hand side and at the top. Watch as I move to the streamed one. Look at all that macro blocking. Look at all that noise. Look at all the distortion, the banding, the colour banding. Look at the gun now. You can see it all on the gun. All those dark monotone colours that carry on through long periods and then gradually, just gradients effectively, really highlight the issues with the codec and what streaming needs to work on. Moving to the PS3, visually it's a much closer definition of native PS3, which you can see on the left here, and then right, the PSNOW streaming version of Uncharted 2. It's very close. Again, some of that detail is smudged. The colour's different. That's another thing you have to compensate for a stream. All that colour encoding is lost due to the compression techniques. You lose some of that vibrant red. This is all captured in identical gamma settings on the same capture card to obviously mitigate any differences between those two to give you the closest possible analysis of both versions. But Uncharted 2 is very close to a native presentation. It's both 720p, so the resolution difference doesn't make much difference at all. And that image quality and that compression technique and the AA does deliver quite a close looking title, which sometimes even has slightly less aliasing than the native PS3 one, but that's because the image is not as sharp and there's more processing going on that image to give you the final output. And this carries over to the PS2 and the PS3 emulation that's running here in the PS Now. Pretty sure this is native consoles, and that means it runs natively on the PS4, PS2 emulation. So I suspect that PS5 and PS Now will push harder into a full suite of PS1 to PS4 emulation, or native running in terms of PS4. And then likely a vast infrastructure enhancement to PS Now to push that out and encapsulate the entire suite of PlayStation series of titles from 1 to 5, allowing you to play them online in a much better package for a single subscription model, which will pull in far more players away from other brands, even if they're not going to invest in possibly, I think, an expensive PlayStation 5. If you think about it, they're already forcing you to use a DualShock here, so a DualShock 5 will likely have some features that forces them to use this as well. And if you made it all the way to this point, well done. But because of that, I'm splitting the video into two. So I'm moving into the far more important input latency and performance, which I'm sure many of you are most interested in. And it's probably, arguably, the biggest deficit the whole thing has. Image quality wise, make up your mind for yourself. It's not ideal for me and probably most of the people watching this video, but could you put up with this to play some of these games?
What the hell are you doing here?
I'm looking for you, mate.
Uh-oh. Should I be flattered or worried?
Maybe a bit of both.
Mars. I always thought of it as a romantic place, a planet of mystery and adventure. Came here 6 months ago thinking it would be an escape from Earth. I wanted some time to think, to figure out what to do with my life.